We are just weeks away from the new Dawn of Calamity expansion. This is the expansion that the 2021 World Grand Prix will be played on, so these are the cards that all the top players from around the world are stressing out about. Everyone's shot at 1.5 million USD hinges on the cards we'll be seeing over the next 2 weeks, and speaking of which, would you believe it, I have a new card just for you. It's Artifact Impulse. This is a 2 playpoint Portalcraft spell that summons an ancient artifact while you have 5 or fewer differently named artifacts destroyed. Otherwise, it deals 6 damage to a random enemy follower, and if they have no followers, it deals 6 face damage to the opponent. At a glance, Artifact Impulse is the latest iteration of stack artifacts to deal face damage. This card is incredibly cheap at only 2 play points, and with 2 different but very useful effects, one of its biggest strengths lies in its flexibility. Right out of the gate, 2 play points for 6 face damage sounds staggeringly efficient, which is only compounded by Artifact Portal always having a playpoint recovery effect in rotation. Mobilize Factory is still in rotation for several more months, so you can expect very frequent power plays ending with Artifact Impulse. Ralmia's rotation caused Artifact Portal to rotate out of the meta along with her, since losing her immense utility left a massive gap in the deck. Artifact Impulse is pretty clearly meant to be a replacement for Ralmia as a 2 playpoint card with both early game utility and potential as a finisher. Artifact Impulse does not have the artifact trait itself. Ancient Artifact is a name that you will definitely get regardless, so unlike Ralmia, Artifact Impulse effectively fails to add an extra name to the stack. In the earlier stages of the game, before you have 6 artifact names, 2 play points for an ancient artifact is nothing special, but it does keep your hand moving. Unlike Bahamut, Artifact Impulse is not a completely dead card if you draw it too early. There are games where all you need is some way to spend a couple play points on any artifact just to reduce the cost of your paradigm shifts, so it's incredibly helpful to have this early game option. Artifact Impulse is to Absolute Modesty what Augmentation Bestowal is to Mobilize Factory. Absolute Modesty also deals damage to a random enemy follower or to the face if there is no follower, but Modesty is a follower with a permanent evolve effect that generally takes up your turn to set up. Meanwhile, Artifact Impulse is not permanent, but is incredibly cost efficient and easy to fit into any turn. Since it's a cheap spell with no restrictions, you can play multiple Artifact Impulses on the same turn, in contrast to Modesty's leader effect being unstackable. Since Absolute Modesty was a leader effect, you could deal its damage even if you spent all your play points on something very expensive, with the most famous example being Modesty plus Vertex Colony. Vertex Colony could generally clear the board on its own, perhaps with a 0 playpoint paradigm, to ensure that Modesty damage went face. However, the current Artifact Portal in rotation must manually remove boards the old-fashioned way by trading things in. It's a shame that Lucille, Keeper of Relics, is rotating out with the rest of Fortune's Hand, because the board clear from the Spinaria and Lucille token would synergize extremely well with Artifact Impulse. Lucille is typically a card that conflicts with Mobilize Factory, so it might have been possible to create a faster, more tempo-based deck. Without her, it looks like Artifact Portal will heavily revolve around Mobilize Factory, just like in Darkness over Velsar. There's no denying that Artifact Portal has very little issue with clearing boards by trading, but it does add at least a slight limitation on how much burst they can deal without making some kind of compromise. For example, with Factory active, you can play Artifact Carrier into Artifact Impulse for a potential 14 or 16 damage, but this only works if the opponent has no board. Whenever play points need to be spent on clearing the board, your maximum burst potential with Artifact Impulse may be limited. Naturally, you'll want to trade with Airstrike artifacts, since they cash in their damage without hitting face. However, you can expect your opponent to play around Artifact Impulse by making the best board they can against multiple instances of 2 or 3 damage. If you need to use barrier artifacts with Rush to clear the board, it directly translates to lower burst overall. The main strengths that Ralmia offered were her unique name and her scalable storm damage. She required a total of 8 play points to gain Storm, and while it's perfectly possible to cheat that out with 0 playpoint paradigms or Mobilize Factory, Artifact Impulse's low cost definitely gives you some more options on your lethal turn. Most notably, it's very easy to fit Artifact Impulse in at the end of a Miriam turn. Therefore, a common pattern for Artifact Portal in Dawn of Calamity would be the following: push as much chip damage as possible in the early turns, play Miriam Mutinous Being with Resonance, clear the board using as many Airstrike artifacts as possible, and finally hit face with Artifact Impulse. This pattern can very easily deal upward of 16 damage, making it very likely to be lethal with just a few points of early chip damage. Miriam combos already had OTK potential without Artifact Impulse, so now the odds of getting an OTK are a bit higher. do this on a Miriam turn, some of your airstrikes may need to be barriers instead, which is an effective loss of 2 or 4 damage apiece on the turn. Since Artifact Impulse is so cheap, you can easily play multiple copies over multiple turns to take advantage of decks that lack consistent healing, such as Last Word Shadow. With Factory active, you can play Spinaria, Keeper of the End, trade off her artifacts to hit exactly 6 out of 6 names, and then push face with Artifact Impulse and set up for Miriam Lethal next turn. Unfortunately, Celeste Omega is still in rotation, so preventing Artifact from playing spells only becomes more effective once they start relying on Artifact Impulse. As a Raumia replacement, Artifact Impulse has some very big metal shoes to fill. The fact that Raumia provides an extra artifact name cannot be understated, so cards like Carnelia, Servant of Darkness may rise in value so that Artifact Impulse is active as early as possible. The chief advantage of Artifact Impulse is its flexibility as a 2 playpoint spell, which opens up countless possibilities for multiple turn lethal setups. With how effective Artifact Impulse can be at every stage of the game, there's basically no way that future Artifact decks won't play it. It's not clear right now whether Impulse is strong enough to carry Artifact Portal back to top tier, but the sheer potential with cards like Miriam and Spinaria definitely makes it look feasible. That does it for this card review. To see the most informative English Shadowverse content, make sure to check out tempostorm.com for the latest articles and in-depth deck guides. You can follow me on Twitter at NoireSV. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.